What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Bridging the Gap here on the Jersey First TV network. I'm AJ Malillo.
Stephen Rombolo here.
And as you can see, we are joined with a guest today. His name is Jack Bartek. How you doing, Jack?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here with you guys. We used to do this in college on the radio station, and now here we are once again.
Yeah, for sure, Jack. It's super exciting to be back with you, back in action. So just to get the viewers to understand where we're coming from and why Jack is with us today. So Jack was an intern with the New Jersey Jackals, and he did some play-by-play with the New Jersey Jackals, and we could get into that a little bit more. But the NJ Jackals used to play at Yogi Berra Stadium at Montclair State University, and they are moving from the stadium. We don't know where they're going yet, and so that's a big reason why we have Jack on. He's going to talk a little bit about who the Jackals are, what their impact on the Montclair community was, and maybe some of the suspicion as to where they'll move, although we don't know, nobody knows exactly where yet, and just a little bit about the shift of minor league semi-professional baseball in New Jersey and where that has gone. But before we do all of that, Jack, let's just talk a little bit about you, a little bit about your experience with the Jackals and experience at Montclair State, being pretty much the face of our sports broadcasting program. Quite literally, name a face on a billboard.
I was gonna say not just the sports broadcasting, the face of Montclair State. So
I'm honored.
You can see it behind you, Jack.
Yeah, I over the shoulder. Yeah, there I am.
But yeah, Jack, so let's talk a little bit about your experience at MSU and with the Jackals.
Yeah, so obviously coming in at Montclair State, you guys remember me as a little tiny freshman in 2018. And it was just such a budding operation that they had there in the School of Communication and Media, and I was able to hit it at the perfect time. We had this brand new building. We had, like you and me were talking about before, AJ, a great group of students that worked together so well, no matter what department you were in or what your focus was, whether it was news or writing or sports or radio, everybody worked hand in hand so well. There were great professors, and really everyone on campus was so helpful that I met amongst my 4 years, which is crazy to say. And it might sound like I'm an advertisement for Montclair State right now, but it was genuinely the best decision I ever made in my life going there. I was able to do things from day one, getting on air at the radio station that would have taken me 2 or 3 years at a bigger school. And all of that experience kind of culminated over the 4 years, and it led me to feel like, I was put in a good place when I left there and I graduated from Montclair State, and I was confident walking into the real world. And one of those experiences I had when I was at Montclair was with the Jackals, who obviously played on campus. It was the perfect relationship. And there were other Montclair kids too. Every year it would feel like, 3 or 4 kids would be there interning over the summer. And, it wasn't paid. You could get credits for it, which was nice, but it was a good summer internship if you wanted to be in sports, because you experienced a little bit of everything. You experienced the business aspect of it, the roster building in the front office. You got to talk to the players and hear about their experience. We would do everything from pulling the tarp on the field when it rained, to checking tickets when people came in the ballpark, to, like you mentioned when I first came on, commentary and the stuff up in the booth, which was my main focus and my main concern when I was there. But it was a really cool community to be a part of, because if you're a fan of minor league baseball anywhere, you understand what it's like to follow a minor league baseball team. It's not like following the Mets or Yankees, where no player will ever really know any fan more than Joe Schmo. But when you're a fan of the Jackals, you sit in the same seat every game. You get to know the faces. There's only, I think, Yogi Berra Stadium held 5,000 people at its maximum. So every day it was a lot of the same people in the ballpark, and the players recognize that. And, if you ask them about Trumpet Guy, they know when they're coming in for a save in the ninth inning, Trumpet Guy is playing the Narcos trumpets like it's Edwin Diaz coming in to get a save. And I thought that was a really cool aspect of it. And everybody was so great to work with. As tough and long as the days could be, it was always a joy to go there because of the people that were filling up the stadium.
Yeah, I think what you hit on is one of the biggest points of them leaving Yogi Berra Stadium, and why it's so upsetting is that you built this culture, this community at Montclair State with not just students but members of the community that would come and watch the minor league team or pro team play. So I think that them leaving will kind of have some pretty unfortunate adverse impacts on the kids that are in the School of Comms at Montclair and the community as a whole. So what do you think about that? Do you think that the community will be able to move with the Jackals wherever they move, provided they stay in the state, or do you think it's going to be, sort of like building a new community somewhere?
Yeah, it's definitely a shame that they had to move on. And I'm sure that there's good reason for it. But I remember when I was a kid and I would go to games with my dad. I specifically remember one time we were walking on the concourse and a foul ball landed right in front of us, and my dad grabbed it with one hand and we brought it home. And it was just one of those things where if you want to go to a baseball game on a Saturday afternoon and you didn't want to spend $100 on a ticket and 50 more to park at Yankee Stadium, you could go to Yogi Berra Stadium and watch a Jackal game for $15.
Right.
And it was just such a cool place to be, and the stories of the players were something unlike you could get at an MLB ballpark. You would see guys that were,
For,
either fighting to make it to the next level or had been to the next level and are still playing to either make it back or just living out the end of their baseball career. And there's something so true about that, something so real about it, so raw that you won't get at any other level, which I feel like is getting lost. And you look at New Jersey the past couple of years, how many minor league baseball teams it's lost, especially since COVID. A lot of minor league baseball teams around the country have had to either shut down or move, and it's such a shame. New Jersey had the Newark Bears that are gone now, the New Jersey Jackals, which fingers crossed are going to stay in the state. And I could go on and on. I think it's only down to 5 minor league teams in the entire state now, or non-affiliated ball teams, and it's just sad that that community is shrinking.
Yeah, for sure. And especially because you don't have a big pro team in New Jersey. Obviously, we're close to the Mets and we're close to the Yankees and we're close to the Phillies, depending on where you are in the state. But those minor league teams, I mean, it's always fun. And maybe, Steve, I'm sure you have some memories of going to see the Jersey Shore Blue Claws, or when we were growing up, it was the Lakewood Blue Claws too, right? Like, I don't know if you went for school, but we used to go with our school all the time. And so those minor league affiliates, they're cheap and they're fun ways to just kind of introduce kids to the game. Now, obviously Steve's not the biggest baseball fan in the world, but who doesn't love a nice hot dog on a summer day?
I hear that they're doing dollar beers at the Blue Claw Stadium. That's more my alley now.
That's perfect though. Like, but where are you going to get that really anywhere else?
No, listen, as admittedly as much as I'll stand on my soapbox for 2 seconds, think that baseball is a ridiculously boring sport, and would never willingly go to a game. I do remember as a kid, and maybe AJ, you might have memories of this, but they used to have at the Blue Claw Stadium a Commerce Bank box, which is where my mom worked at Commerce Bank for many years. So she would get the box seats often. And for me, the most exciting part was going, and they used to have like a little inflatable area, and we would get like wristbands that came with the box tickets. So for me, all the fun was everything happening that wasn't baseball. Um, but as somebody who appreciates other sports, I totally understand and can appreciate that level of community, gathering on, like you said, a Saturday night, a Saturday afternoon, and it's all people local to the area, and you're just watching some guys who are there to, like you said, either chase their dreams or finish out their dreams. And it's tough to see that leave a college campus, especially considering that that's the same field that the Montclair State team plays on, right? So those kids that are trying to break out from college and maybe land on the minor league team or get scouted to go to the major leagues, seeing those guys, seeing those games, it's got to remove some of that closeness to the dream. And I think, if nothing else, at least the sports community, not even just at Montclair State, but in that area, is really gonna I don't want to say suffer, because I think that with sports teams, you understand that these things happen and it's part of the process, but it's going to be a tough hurdle to cross. And I'm curious to see, what Montclair looks like after this. I will say the one thing that I do really love, as much as I don't like baseball, is that awesome museum that we have on campus attached to the stadium as well. Like, if nothing else, it's great that that's there, and it still gives people a reason to come out and enjoy the stadium, and that community still has something to be proud of in that location.
Yeah, and before we go on, Steve, just to hit on two things that you said. One, the Montclair State community aspect of it. I remember in 2019, so probably right at the start of my sophomore year, it was September of 2019. The Jackals were making a playoff run, and they would actually go on to win the Can-Am League championship that year. It was, I believe, the last year the Can-Am League even existed before they had to shut down due to COVID, and all of those teams would join the Frontier League. But the Jackals were on a run towards the Can-Am League championship, and a lot of the interns from the season had gone back to school because it's a bunch of college kids that live in the area. And so I, as a sophomore, was recruited by the Jackals people to come and help out on a couple of playoff games. And one, it was a great experience for me to be able to work for a semi-pro baseball team as just a sophomore that, I wouldn't have had they not been on the campus of Montclair State. And two, it was really cool because the place was packed. You think about it, these college kids are coming in the first 2-3 weeks of their time on campus. They got a minor league baseball team playing there. You get out of sociology class at 6 o'clock, you run over to the stadium, you pay $10, you get, a beer and a dog, and you enjoy a baseball game. I just remember those games being really packed up, and it was a great experience. And although it's only a month of the year in September where they were playing overlapping with the students coming back, it was really cool to be able to see what the stadium was like, especially on those nights.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's such a unique thing too. I don't know of any other college campus that has something like that. But we're talking about them moving, and one of the big restoration projects that's been going on in New Jersey, and this will be the last point of the interview because unfortunately we're going to have to move on, is the Hinchcliffe Stadium, which is one of the last Negro League stadiums still around, let alone now it's going to be refurbished and possibly be able to play in. So one of the leading suspicions is that the Jackals might end up playing at that stadium. And I just want, if that does happen, Jack, what do you think that will look like for that community? I personally think that would be an awesome move, although it's disappointing to leave Montclair, to bring back so much history of that stadium and bring back sort of baseball to Paterson, New Jersey. I think would be really awesome. So I want to hear your thoughts on that, Jack.
Yeah, well, I'll say, for anybody that doesn't have the background of Hinchcliffe Stadium and the history behind it, I'll give a little plug to our very own professors at Montclair State, Kelly Whiteside and Tom Franklin, who did some spectacular reporting on it and the how they're bringing that ballpark back to life and their plans for it. Really well done. Great work. I would recommend anybody to go check it out if they want some background on Hinchcliffe Stadium. And, I think it would be a really cool landing spot if that is where they end up going. With all the history there, especially as we've tried to honor the Negro Leagues the last couple of years in the MLB and at all levels of baseball, to move a minor league team into one of the last remaining Negro League stadiums would be such a great honor. And it would open up so many opportunities and open up so many doors for the Jackals. I don't know if, hypothetically they would be renamed or what the case might be. But I remember when I was interning with the Jackals last summer, they had a Larry Doby night. And part of Larry Doby night was honoring the great baseball history of Paterson and all of that. So it would be an even better opportunity to shine a spotlight on the great baseball history of Paterson. And, I just think it would create some really great opportunities, hopefully create some buzz and, keep that baseball life injected into the area. Paterson is only Hinchcliffe Stadium, I think, would be 10, 15 minutes from Montclair. So right. Any of the people that were Jackals faithful in Montclair could just as easily make the trip over to Hinchcliffe Stadium. It wouldn't be too far of a move where you would lose your season ticket holders and people that really love Jackals baseball. And you would also be able to introduce a new group of people who, oh, I see they just reopened Hinchcliffe Stadium. There's a new team playing. Let's go check it out. And you could almost, just as Yogi Berra Stadium and the Yogi Berra Museum was a learning experience for the fans that went there, Hinchcliffe Stadium could also be a similar type of vibe, which I think would be incredible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Jack. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I have one last question, and then I'll let Steven ask any final questions that he may have. New York Jets football's coming back. Jack and I are both big Jets fans. What do you think this
Tough.
year? What do you think
That's
this
tough.
year?
Well, I mean, you could consult anybody in my family. I was on vacation when the Jets and Eagles were playing the preseason game when Zach Wilson got hurt. I was distraught. I was beside myself. There was no consoling me. I was down bad, and
I was at that
obviously,
game, Jack. I understand.
it was terrible. It was terrible. And luckily, we get the news the next day that he's not out for the season. There is hope. And listen, people don't give Joe Flacco the credit that I think he deserves. He never throughout his career got the credit he deserved. And I'm not saying he's going to come out and light the world on fire, but as I was saying to you before the interview, AJ, Joe Flacco won a Super Bowl. He's a Super Bowl MVP. So, this isn't some Joe Schmo, nobody taking over the team. He has that experience. He can come in, hopefully groom some of these young guys through their first couple of NFL games. And then the real goal is that when Zach Wilson is able to come back in week 3, week 4, whenever it may be, he can take that leap that we have prayed for this offseason. And if he can be the quarterback that we think he can be, this team has sky high potential. This is the best Jets roster I think we've seen since, you could argue that 2015 year where they won 10 games and just missed the playoffs. But I would say maybe even going all the way back to the 2011 AFC Championship team. The tough part is the AFC is loaded this year. So
Stacked.
I don't have my hopes too high. I just want them to be playing meaningful December football. If we are watching games in December and looking at the standings saying, if we do this, this, and this, we can be a playoff team, I would be happy with that. Even if they miss the playoffs, you have something to build on, and I think they have the right people in place. Robert Saleh, Joe Douglas, and everybody in that front office really seems like they have a good head on their shoulders, and they're all working together towards the same goal, which is something we haven't been able to say for a decade. So I feel good overall.
Couldn't agree more, Jack. I think they're doing the right things over there in Florham Park, New Jersey, to set us up well in East Rutherford. Steven, I will kick it to you, and then before we say goodbye to our good pal Jack.
I am not a sports guy whatsoever, so I wish that I had something to contribute here. With regard to football, all I'll say is I'm cheering on A-Rod, number 12, Green Bay Packers. Hit him with the three-peat, league MVP. That's my guy. That's my team. I'm a little bit worried about our receiving core, but we have future Hall of Famer Alan Lazard, so we'll be safe. We'll be
I
safe.
love it. I love it. All right, Jack, thank you so much. If people are interested in getting in contact with you and seeing what you're doing, where can they reach you?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm always available. I don't know if I plug my socials here.
Plug wherever you want to plug, my man.
I would say I'm on Twitter mostly at Jack Bartek. If anybody wants to follow, I have semi-humorous tweets, more retweets than anything, but I think I'm a pretty good follow. Currently, I'm working, helping out with MSG on some high school football on Friday and Saturday nights, so check that out, and hopefully I'll be getting some camera time soon. But definitely a pleasure to be on, and thank you guys for having me.
Of course, Jack, with that face, they'd be stupid not to put you on the camera, my man.
It's
We will
true.
see you around. Keep up the good work, and thanks for joining Bridging the Gap here on the Jersey First TV network. See you soon, Jack. And we are back. Thank you, Jack, for a great interview. I hope you guys enjoyed that. A little bit of baseball history in the state of New Jersey and a little bit about a local team that they had an impact on the community of Montclair State University. But with that, Sure.
Before you go, I wanted to ask, just because I was thinking about it and I didn't want to, because Jack, listen, for those of you that don't know, Jack Bartek, big, I promise you, this guy is going to be on your television someday commentating sports. Like he is truly the future of this, right? So I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of a young talent. The stadium, Hinchcliffe Stadium, is the one by Patterson Falls that like CC Sabathia is involved in.
Yeah.
Like Okay, all right. I wanted to make
Yes.
sure my head was right and I knew exactly what you guys were talking about. I've actually seen some pictures, and the first time I went to Patterson Falls, I ended up parking like in the lot around there because it used to be disheveled. I'm talking like
Yeah.
3 years ago. Like it looked like a shell of a place, and I think it's awesome that they're gonna refurb that. And I remember when they broke ground on it, all the pictures and stuff. So very exciting. And then the other baseball question I had, and again I didn't want to embarrass myself, Roberto Clemente,
What?
Patterson baseball,
Yeah.
right?
Roberto Clemente, Patterson baseball. That sounds right. I don't know off the top of my head, but that
I
definitely
thought he was.
that definitely sounds right. Roberto Clemente is the first Puerto Rican Major League Baseball player. Uh,
Yes, I
so
thought
that
I thought he was a Patterson guy.
he's from Puerto Rico, but it wouldn't surprise me if he had a big influence in Patterson.
Like,
Uh,
yeah, that's where I thought he like kind of made his bones was in that area.
yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I am ashamedly not the high in like my Roberto Clemente history is a bit lacking, and it shouldn't be. But uh, what are you gonna do? I think that's right. It sounds right to me. But you can look that up. Fact check us. Tell us about Roberto Clemente. I love learning about baseball. Love learning about history. So
Homework for the listeners.
homework for the listeners. There you go. But with that, so obviously this is airing on September 10th. So tomorrow or whenever you're listening to this, obviously September 11th is one of the darkest days in American history, and especially dark for our corner of the country, being so close to New York City and Washington D.C. and Pennsylvania, where the three sites of the plane crashes were. It's always important to remember those that were lost, to think about the heroes of that tragic day and the weeks and months that followed it, and just talk a little bit about the history and the impact that it has subsequently had. So, Stephen, I'll let you kind of touch on what you want to touch on first, and I can talk a little bit after.
Yeah, I would agree. I think 9/11 is one of those days that, as a country, um, it's important to take that day and really reflect and remember, exactly everything that happened that day, but also everything that has happened as a result of that day. That day fundamentally changed the life of every American who was alive then and will ever be alive after that. Right there, you have to look at American history in a pre and post 9/11 perspective. Um, I always found it interesting growing up, and this isn't something that really like hit me until I had friends that weren't from this area, because 9/11 is very much a part of our lives, whether or not we realize it. And I think you and I, age wise, and most of our listeners, probably sit on that cusp where it's like we were alive, but we don't really remember it type thing. I remember that's how in high school teachers would always like, they'd be like, oh, you guys are like the ones that don't remember 9/11. That's crazy. I feel
Right.
old. That's how they would like gauge it. Um, but I have, through my years and especially my experiences in Montclair, which I know you and I did a lot of these things together, have learned so much about how many stories actually exist from that day. And I think it's important to tell them all. And while I was not there, my father, who at the time was assistant chief volunteer firefighter in Seaside Heights, um, actually went out there with some members of his company to help the day of 9/11. And hearing his experiences of that day are just remarkable. They showed up, and he has these awesome pictures, which hopefully I'll be able to find, and maybe we can have them displayed on the screen, that he took with a like an old school like disposable camera, and told me probably one of the scariest things I've ever heard in my life. He was there after the towers had fell, but that whole day, all that debris was constantly moving and still falling because it was just, I mean, absolutely catastrophic. And he told us a story, and he has a picture that kind of coincides with the story about how they were just kind of surveying the area, helping it, like, people get out of the area. They weren't necessarily allowed, like, in ground zero when it was happening because They traveled out from Jersey, like just kind of there to help. And he said it was like one of the scariest things of his life. It was like a plume of debris and smoke, like you see in movies, that just kind of started coming down the street. And they had to hide like behind this car, and you just heard things getting mashed and mangled. And I mean, the importance of sharing these stories, right, is to, obviously we weren't there that day. We'll never know what it was like, but the actual terror and horror that those events struck on that community, as well as the communities in Pennsylvania and Washington D.C., are so far reaching beyond just this corner of the country, because you're talking about major airlines, right? American Airlines. People were on those planes from all over. And this is a story that touches every single American and has fundamentally changed the way that we live our lives. TSA, the Patriot Act, right? Like we could make it a political thing, and I don't think it's right to. The important thing to remember on this day is just kind of be grateful for, and the most amazing thing to me, and I think this is going to sound not at all the way that I mean it to, but my favorite thing to think about on 9/11 is how our country, in almost the blink of an eye, unified, put together our differences or put them aside, and stood together to face a common enemy. And this is something that you and I for years have talked about, as we've kind of politically become more divided. Can we have that sort of unity again? And it's bizarre to use 9/11 as that point, but I think that there is a point to be made here. When you, in the face of a tragedy, can muster your country to, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to cut. Is there people outside that studio?
There's people outside. Can you hear them? Yeah.
Oh yeah, fully just heard that whole laugh and everything. That was crazy.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, a little countdown.
I'll just mute and then.
Perfect.
5.
Unity in face of tragedy, I think, is the most inspiring thing to think about on 9/11, and how our country came together, pulled together, and fought a common enemy. And we all made sacrifices. We all had to change the way that we live day to day. We changed the way that we travel. And unfortunately, there are some people post 9/11 who changed the way that they feel about others, which is not the right thing to do. The story of 9/11 to me, we're 21 years now, which is crazy to think about that it's been that long since it's happened, is just, I'm going to keep saying the word unity, and remembering that, despite our differences politically, socially, culturally, whatever you want to call it within this country, we are all American at the end of the day. And in the face of a real common enemy, a real evil, we have to remember that, and we have to be able to put our differences aside and come together. I think a lot about George Bush throwing out that first pitch at Yankee Stadium, to tie it back to what we were talking about with Jack in baseball history. You want to talk about baseball history? You're talking post 9/11, the city where it happened. The president steps out in this state. I have chills just thinking about it, and I wasn't even there. Steps out in this stadium, and people are chanting the USA, yeah, and he throws the perfect pitch. And he talks about this in his book, which I've read. He's like, there has never, the most pressure he's ever felt in his presidency. This is a man who took this country to war. This is a man who fought for education, who dealt with like arsenic bombs. The most pressure that he felt was throwing that pitch at the first Yankees game post 9/11 in New York City. And my God, did he throw the most perfect first pitch I've ever seen.
Yeah, perfect strike. And Derek Jeter talks about it in the recent documentary. And I know George Bush has talked about it too, where basically, George Bush gets to the stadium and he's warming up and he's talking to the players, and he goes down to the batting cages where Derek Jeter is, the captain of the New York Yankees, right? And he's like, Jeter, Derek, do you got any advice for me? And he said, well, Mr. President, you better throw a strike because they'll boo you if you don't. And he wasn't wrong. He wasn't kidding. And he threw a perfect strike.
No, it's remarkable to think about. Obviously, it's important. Remember the tragedy, honor those lost, honor those who gave the sacrifice, fought in the wars, and all of those things. But the beauty of a day like that is remembering those moments, the moments where we stood together, where we stood tall, and we faced this evil together as a country. I think it's a real hopeful message, and it's exactly how I and anybody should look at this really tragic day in American history and take it as a learning moment and a reflection point and say, we together are stronger than anything in our path.
Yeah, I think that what makes it so uniquely American, other than the fact that it obviously happened on our shores, which is so rare in our nation's history, but it's the fact that the United States, Americanism is optimism at its core. It's finding that good in the face of evil, and always trying to push for the good in the face of evil, and that's the American vision that I see when you look at the course of history, right? The United States has always been the the country to fight evil abroad, or try to fight evil abroad, what they think is evil abroad, and then Americans always band together to try and fight evil at home, right? That's kind of the path of the American people, and you lose your way on that path on occasion, but that is the overall path. And so to your point, when you're talking about the tragedies of 9/11, I think that it's vital to talk about the tragedies, but also, like you said, to talk about how you get knocked to your knees quite literally as a country, and we got back up and we said that we'll fight it. This isn't the end. This isn't You're not going to bring us down like that. Um, and your father has the stories as a first responder from New Jersey. My father was also a first responder. He was a police officer in the borough of Queens at the time, so he was a cop in New York City during 9/11. He was actually working his other job when it happened that morning in New Jersey, and he went back home and he got his uniform, and he drove in, and he tells the story of him driving over the Verrazano, where he obviously had to show his police badge, the only way that you could get into the city, and there was nobody else on the bridge. The Verrazano Bridge, if you ever cross it, it always has people on it. There's always traffic, and he was the only car on the road, and obviously all this smoke and smog and whatnot in the air, and hearing the story, it's something post-apocalyptic nightmare scenario. Like it brings me to the visual that I see is kind of like the visual in the beginning of The Walking Dead, where Rick is sort of riding into the city of, I think it's Atlanta, and everything is abandoned, and it's like this nightmare of apocalyptic natures, and kind of my dad had experienced something like that firsthand in his life, something that you wish that nobody would ever have to experience. And then for months afterwards, just cleaning up the debris, and finding things that nobody should have to lay their eyes on. It's tough. It's a tough thing to talk about, even for people that might not remember it, like the two of us, or aren't or weren't even alive, like some of the people in our generation that are a couple of years younger than us. But just because you weren't alive, just because you might not remember it vividly, doesn't make it less important to always tell the stories. And I think that the most important thing at this point is telling the stories of the people, which we have tried to do every year that we've been broadcasting on September 11th, is to try and tell a different story. We've gotten the story of the photographer that took the famous picture of the firemen hoisting the flag in the rubble. We've gotten other stories of journalists that covered the day, and what their experiences were. So I recommend reading up on some stories. Turn on the news, even though, nobody who watches cable news anymore, like if there's any day to watch cable news, it's that day, so that they can relive and tell the stories of these people, because they shouldn't be forgotten. Yeah.
And to that point too, I'd also say, if anybody has the opportunity locally to visit Ground Zero, um, where the towers once stood is the most beautiful memorial that I have ever seen. And if I'm ever in that area, I always make it a point to
Yeah.
stop by. And that's another thing about our response to this, is that we have so beautifully honored the legacy of those buildings, the legacy of those lost. And I'm sure if you haven't, I don't know what rock you've been living under, but if you've not seen, World Trade Center One, that's been finished for a few years now, the rebuild, it is a beautiful, beautiful building, and stands just as tall, just as landmarkish as the ones that stood before it.
1,776 feet tall.
Yes, sir.
Freedom Tower.
It is remarkable. So, and again, I think even, and this is how deep it goes, right? We have our response as a nation, the sacrifices we made as a society, as people, but now to erect buildings that are more beautiful, that are more advanced, and just more absolutely stunning to the eye, is almost a very polite way of, saying, hey, look, at you knocked this down, we're going to build it better, and we are going to make it more beautiful, and we are going to honor what was here beforehand. We will never forget, and we will do it better. And if that's not the most American thing, I don't know what is. And I, on days like 9/11, am so proud to be an American, especially from the place, hit the hardest by this, to sort of stand tall with my neighbors and everybody in this community, and say, "Mm, try again. We're better."
Yeah, yeah, and they'll never be able to do anything, bring us to the knees like that again. We won't let it
No,
happen. So,
no.
with that, so just remembering the people that were lost obviously is important this weekend. But we do have the rest of the show to get to. So we're gonna move on from that, and we're going to move to our first story of the day, which we hinted at last week, which is talking about freedom of speech on platforms like Twitter and Facebook. So basically, what kind of brought this news to the forefront was this clip that Mark Zuckerberg had while on the Joe Rogan Experience, where he basically all but admitted that the FBI said to Facebook, or Meta, the parent company of Facebook, like, look, there's been some Russian disinformation in the past, or foreign disinformation in the past, and we're kind of worried about it. So just keep an eye out for stuff like that. Eventually, the Hunter Biden story gets broken by the New York Post, and Facebook kind of takes it as, look at this example of possible disinformation, and they push the story down. They don't really block the story. They don't go as far as Twitter goes in fully blocking the story to the point that you can't even share it, but they definitely hindered its performance on the website. So this has brought a lot of people, like, this is basically the FBI telling these social media companies to censor things that are being broken by, the New York Post is the oldest newspaper in America. This isn't just some random newspaper or some random internet blog, right? The New York Post. So there's a lot of questions that came out of that. And then also, as we talked about a few weeks ago, the Alex Berenson story, which has only continued to develop, where basically he was a respected journalist that was asking questions about mRNA vaccines, which are the vaccines used for the COVID pandemic, and he got removed from Twitter, sued Twitter, got put back on the platform, and is now planning on suing the White House and one of the former staffers in the White House, because he has actual evidence of these correspondence between the White House and Twitter, basically saying that, like, he is object numero uno of disinformation, and he should not be on the platform spreading this disinformation, which has now come out to be true information. It wasn't misinformation at all.
So I think it's fair just to point with the emails when they read, it's more like, well, the White House is inquiring about, the information Berenstein's putting out. We just want to make sure that you guys are, on top of these things, fact checking these things. It was more
Soft.
suggestively inquisitive about an individual's speech. I wouldn't
Yeah.
say it was as hard pressed as like, this is the guy. It's more like, well, he's popped up on the radar. Just want to make sure you
I th-
guys are aware of him. We want to know what
I
you're going to
think
do about it.
right. I think what makes it so damaging is that they were directly targeting a journalist, right? In their
Yeah.
suggestions, it was like directly Alex Berenson, this guy is questionable. Maybe you should look into him, right? Which is quite suggestive. Um,
Yeah.
along with that, you have other journalists that were emailing back and forth with Twitter trying to remove Alex Berenson, or suggesting that Alex Berenson is this disinformation source. All of these links are in the sources of the description, so you can read the articles yourself from Alex Berenson's Substack, but it's all backed up. He has picture evidence of it. So basically what this gets down to is there is high concern, in my opinion, about these government agencies sort of interacting in this manner with these social media companies, that I think very close to, if not completely passing the line, at least borderline, flirt with the idea that the government is using these organizations to compel free or to quash some free speech of certain individuals in our country, which would be a direct violation of the First Amendment. There's a principle in the First Amendment that the government can't force companies to do their bidding, especially in this regard. So I don't know. I don't think it's a stretch to say that these companies have had a history of at least doing questionable things with people on their platforms that they've hid behind the fact that they're a private company with, and now they're getting very close to a line that defense has run its course.
Yeah. So I've maintained this for actually since it happened. Uh to me, the standout case, the first one I remember, is Alex Jones. You're talking about a guy who was on the money with just about everything that he reported, whether or not are a fan of his sensationalism, because that's what it is. He's a personality at the end of the day. But a lot of the information that Alex Jones has delivered over the course of his career has been correct and has been proven. Maybe not instantaneously, but somehow, some way, this guy's always right. And I remember when he got kicked off Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they pulled his InfoWars app from the App Store, like made his content basically impossible to find unless you went direct to the source. Even then, and I don't really agree with many of his takes, I kind of saw the smoke rising from that fire, and we're talking a few years ago. And then you have other high profile bannings like Donald Trump, the president of the United States, right? Whether or not you agree with what he's saying or what he doesn't say or how he says it. And I'm pretty sure they removed him while he was still in office. Uh, you are talking about the leader of the free world using the most used platforms on the face of the planet to communicate directly with his citizenry, the people who elected him, the people whom he is the president of their country, as well as anybody else around the world who cares what the president of the United States has to say, which I'm going to go ahead and take a wild guess and say is a lot of people, right? So you boil it down now, and I feel like this is the breaking point, right? One of the greatest metaphors I ever heard in my life. Um, a guy was explaining that if you're in a glass jar, right, and you're trying to break out of a glass jar, you're pushing and you're pushing and you're pushing, and it's just constant resistance. And the hardest resistance is going to happen right before that glass shatters. And that's sort of your breakthrough point. I think that what we are seeing right now with this particular case, especially because he has such heavy documentation, is sort of that moment right before the glass breaks. And these companies are going to have to decide how they want to proceed forward. And I'll be honest with you, if they don't decide, I have zero issue with a government agency like the FCC coming in and saying, you know what? You guys are going to have to register as public utilities now, and you can't be banning people from your sites. You have to, operate functionally as a government entity and protect the sanctity of free speech. I do not think that that is a government overreach when these private companies sort of willy-nilly can be swayed and abused by the government or whatever other private interests may have their hands in the mix. Because at the end of the day, I don't know who these security officials at Twitter are speaking to, the people who make these decisions on being banned. I don't know who's in their pockets, who's in their phones, who is talking to them, and what agenda that they are pushing. So
Sure.
to protect the sanctity of one of the most fundamental rights of Americans, um, I am fully okay with the government saying, "Yo, Twitter, Facebook, you guys can't do this anymore. Put
Sure.
everybody back, and you are gonna have to let these things be as they are. You are the new public square, and it is what it is." And I'll add to that just very briefly because I know we're on a bit of a time constraint. In that same podcast that we had referenced before, Mark Zuckerberg talks a lot about VR and how Meta's working on these really seriously augmented reality like type things where you are fully immersed in that, right? How are you going to have that function as a second world and then say, but you can't do this, this, and this? You can do everything you could do in the real world, but you can't speak your mind.
Sure, absolutely. I think that that's a major issue with things like that, because if you're going to say that these places, like, the government doesn't have, or the Constitution doesn't have constraint over these businesses because they're businesses, then the worlds that they create like have their own rules and regulations, which is another issue that is down the pike. It's an issue that we're going to have to come to terms with, is these meta worlds, these internet worlds, these are artificial realities, and how we're going to act as a society to mitigate certain civil rights abuses that will come from that, including free speech, like you said. And the most scary part to me is that all of these companies seem to work together to do these bannings, right? Like you said,
Yes.
with Alex Jones, it was Twitter, Facebook, literally everything, Pinterest, like, plus the app stores, and same with Donald Trump. And then afterwards, Parler, tries to rival Twitter, and then Amazon steps in, the App Store steps in, all of these places step in, and they just say no. There's just too much power in this oligopic um, sector of the tech world, that I think it's reasonable that the government has to step in, whether it's Congress with legislation and rewriting Section 230, or the FCC, or I would prefer Congress. I think it would have a little bit
Yeah.
more legitimacy and weight to say, no, you can't do this. Antitrust legislation is a thing for a reason. And it's not, although it's not one business, it's a group of businesses that are clearly working together.
Correct. And I think even important to note, um, more recently, uh, and again, not a big fan of his content, but that dude Andrew Tate was just banned off of everything, and his content is apolitical. He does more social commentary. It's reminds me of a Jordan Peterson type situation where this is another dude who wasn't banned off these things. Well, let me clarify. Jordan Peterson was not ever really banned on anything. Andrew Tate was banned. I'm saying that Andrew Tate's commentary is similar to Jordan Peterson's. That was the point I was making there. But you have a guy who's a lot of the stories we've been talking about have been politically motivated. Andrew Tate, his content isn't really political. He deals a lot with derogatory social commentary, and to decide, hey, you know what, we don't want people hearing that on our platform, you're out of here in an instant. I feel like this guy popped up out of nowhere, was hot for a minute, and then just banned. That cannot be the cycle for controversial people. I don't care if you like what he has to say, don't follow him.
Yeah, I mean,
That's your choice. at the end of
I
the
would
day.
I would completely agree with that. I would say comparing him to Jordan Peterson is kind of like comparing, I don't know, an Alex Jones type to just like any other average commentator. Just because they might, like they're not the same thing. And Jordan Peterson was removed from Twitter based off of some comments that, and so he's still not on Twitter based off of um,
Really?
a dead naming thing scandal with Elliot Page, formerly Ellen Page. Um,
I thought he was
so
back on. That's my
or he
bad.
might be back on now, but he was removed for a time period for that. So it's like the fact of the matter is, it's like you don't have to like what these people say. They have the right to say it. Hate speech
Correct.
isn't protected, or hate speech is
Is.
protected speech, right? So you can say whatever you want. You can disagree with it. Go right ahead. Call him whatever names you want to call, as long as you're not
Sure.
inciting violence. But they have the right to say it, just as you have the right to say something that might be deemed hateful by me or Steven, right? So um, that's just that is the First Amendment. It's the right to say what you want, as long as you're not doing directly insidious, inciting violence, defaming people, things like that.
And I want to just for 1 second broaden this out and say that this is such a unique issue for our generation in particular because we are at the forefront of this new medium of communication. Our parents didn't have this. Our parents had the actual public square, right? And I think it's almost funny to think of it like oh, our parents, used to have to walk and pick up the newspaper, right? So if you read an Alex Berenstein article, I think I just messed his name up. That's my bad. Um, but if you read one of his articles in the New York Times print, you would see his name and you would just flip the page, right? So why, if his article comes up on your Twitter feed or your Facebook or your Instagram, why has the responsibility changed from instead of just scrolling on, it's no, we have to ban him? That to
Right.
me is something that we as a generation, for the generations to follow us now, because this is the new standard operating procedure, right? Is we're going to have to, as our parents and generations before us learn, to just turn the page. You don't like,
I his
who
from Barnes and Noble, like walk
exactly.
past him
That's
on the boardwalk while he's shouting at you.
that's what I was going to say. Like I would never pick up a Bill O'Reilly book, but there's a lot of people for a lot of years who read Bill O'Reilly's books. So
Right.
like it's a matter of, when you step out in public, you have to understand, and I'm referring to Twitter and Facebook and these places as a public space, right? That everybody else is there and everybody has the same rights and privileges as you do. And if you don't like how somebody is using those rights and privileges, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have them, point blank.
Right.
And I think maybe part of the issue here is that there's this gap where our legislators are a little bit too old to really understand the mechanics and how to function on the internet in this way. And I think that this generation that's at the forefront of this is a little bit too young and immature to handle that point of, if you don't like it, you don't have to listen to it. It doesn't mean that they can't say it though.
Yeah.
And
Who was
for
it?
for a
Oliver
long,
Wendell Holmes. Freedom for the thought that we hate, or was it another justice? I think it was
I
Oliver
think it was
Wendell
him.
Holmes. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're gonna have to, dare I say, bridge the gap on this and get to work fast, because the longer we allow these companies, and you're talking to a man who has no trust in any corporation whatsoever, the the longer we allow them to sort of unilaterally make these decisions and take these rights from people, we are setting ourselves up for failure as an entire generation to become complacent with the powers that be deciding who gets to say what and where and when. And I
Yeah.
that is fundamentally anti-American.
Yeah, and I think you'll agree with this. And to just as a point to wrap it up, I think it's so interesting that the people of our generation try and be this fight the man, but they're going to run directly to their arms when they do something that they like. Like, oh, fight the man, no power over here, except for ban Andrew Tate right now because I cannot see his content. It
Correct.
makes me upset, so I can't
Correct.
see it. So
If
please,
you're gonna
the powers that be, save me, protect me.
if you're gonna fight the power, fight the power.
Right. So let's wrap that up. Let's go to our little fun story for the end here, and
Yes.
call it call it an episode. What do you say?
Yes, I think that's a great idea. So, Jersey news. This was absolutely remarkable. Mr. Beast. I don't know if you're familiar. This dude is
He's
24 years
like
old,
the biggest YouTuber, right?
right? So I have some stats pulled up. He's got the fifth largest channel. But wait till you see this number. Between all of his channels combined, this dude has 183 million subscribers. Okay,
That's the
27.
entire tax base of the United States.
There you go. There you go. Right, 27 billion with a B, billion views combined on all of his channels on YouTube. Okay, has this thing that he's been doing. Again, for those of you that don't know, makes these sensational videos where he like spends all this money, has these elaborate sets, does these crazy challenges. This dude started at the age of 13 with YouTube. Has a brilliant, again, Joe Rogan episode where he goes on and he talks about how he achieved such a high level of success at a young age. And you're talking about this guy would grind, would lie to his mother about going to school, would go somewhere else and study YouTube algorithms, the things that make a perfect thumbnail, the perfect length for a video, like obsessive about this. Builds this brand, becomes the fifth most subscribed to channel on, the biggest video sharing platform to ever exist, and uses it in a tremendously unique way, which I think is so interesting to talk about. This man is a full-blown philanthropist at the end of the day, right? So he blends entertainment with philanthropy. So his videos are, he'll get 100 of his subscribers that he just randomly reaches out to, however he does that, and they play a game of hide and seek for $100,000, right? Like, that's sensational. I want to watch that. So what does he do? Racks up these clearly billions of views, and then takes all the money that he makes, reinvests it into a next video. So he is constantly spending his own money, and he is never, he says, he goes, I'm never rich. I never have money in my bank account because whenever I get it, I reinvest it into my brand. So through all of this, he's created a philanthropy channel. He does all these awesome things with Arbor Day. He has a video that is live, will be live forever, where if you go on and you watch it, the revenue, like every view, this company plants a tree. And I don't know how many trees they've done already, but it is like, it's a ridiculous. He raised $20 million for this organization. Has dudes like Elon Musk donating and watching his videos to, support his efforts. So this past weekend, he opened up the first brick and mortar store for his company called Mr. Beast Burger, which was this thing that he did. It was like a challenge for a video that he capitalized on. And the way that it was working was like, you would go to like a Red Robin or a burger joint, and they offered his burger on the menu. This weekend, he comes to the American Dream Mall, which is in East Rutherford, New Jersey, right by, MetLife Stadium. Brand new, beautiful mall, massive, has a water park, ski lifts, all these crazy things in it. And he announced a few days before, he's like, yeah, we're going to open the first Mr. Beast Burger here. 10,000 people showed up to the American Dream Mall and basically shut this place down. And there's videos all over the internet. You can find them. It is like, I had this moment. I was looking at it at work. I watched his like Instagram story, and he's standing on like the fifth level of this building, and he pans down, and it is just a sea of people for 3 floors in our state. And the line to get into this burger place, people waited all day and then some. I don't know how he had enough food to feed these people. It's actually remarkable. And I think it's
Just for a patty with some cheese, man, on a bun.
yeah, that's it. That's it. And I just think it's remarkable because you were talking about a dude who is my age. This guy is 24 years old. He has racked up millions of dollars for organizations. He has changed countless people's lives, and he brought the first brick and mortar store that his brand has ever built to our home state and drew a crowd of 10,000 people. That's like concert numbers for some artists. And it was just to watch this guy open a burger store. it's mind-blowing to me, and I think it's a testament to the absolute power, tenacity, and ingenuity of a generation that can teach themselves anything and capitalize on the investments they make in themselves.
Yeah, I
And
think
yeah,
I think that's a great point. It's this idea, this goal of the generate of our generation, I would say, is to be your own boss. Like I would think that that might be that might have been a goal in the past, but it's the most attainable with our generation, with the way that the
yes,
internet works, with the way that social media works. So I would say that uh, he is a prime example and probably the best example because he's only 24 of somebody who has been able to do that and then realize the social responsibility that I don't know if it was as big of a deal in the past. I would imagine it was, but really recognize his social responsibility and do things with that social responsibility as this influential person. So I'd agree. I think that it's a mark of our generation. It's somebody who made their bones on the internet and then did what he thought was right with that money. And I think that it's a good story. Go check out the burgers. I'm sure there'll be lines for weeks
sure,
now coming. Um,
yeah.
but if you're in the area, I would totally recommend go check it out. I think that would be a fun trip. Maybe Steven and I will go do that and put it up on Jersey First
Oh,
socials. I think that
we
might be fun.
should.
Yeah.
So, and I just want to offer some clarity because it like is mind blowing to me to think, right? So the project I was talking about with the trees, they received $23.89 million in donations, which means that they need to plant 23.89 million trees. This company, they are 4 million trees behind
I
planting,
don't
right?
know if there's space for that many trees.
Right? Crazy. And then he has another project that he did with Team Seas, which deals with ocean cleanup, raised $30 million for Team Seas, which funds the removal of 30 million pounds of plastic from waterways just
That's
all across the globe.
yeah, that's crazy.
So, to your point, he's taken social responsibility in terms of environmental awareness. He is actively changing people's lives. He's done awesome videos where he'll literally go in and he'll like buy everybody's groceries and whatever they're buying in a Walmart and spend six figures and change these people's lives. He gives people's homes, he funds food banks, and he does it all while being charismatic, entertaining, and he's really, if you've ever seen his videos, not not a hard guy to like. He's always got a
Yeah.
smile, and I feel like I could be friends with him. Maybe it's because we're the same age, and he does things like, imagine playing a game of hide and seek with 10 of your best friends, but whoever
Right.
wins walks out with $100,000.
Sounds like
Like
sign me up.
that is so awesome. And to be 24 and support your friends, your community, your family, and the world with this platform that you created by yourself, I think is just such a testament to the power, like you said, of this generation. And to see him realize part of his brand, brick and mortar in a physical location in our state, right up the road from us, is just so remarkable to me because he could have done it anywhere. And wherever he goes, the man only knows love and success. And I think that is such an inspiring story.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, but unfortunately we are out of time today, and so if you have time over the weekend or the next few weeks, totally check out Mr. Beast's Burgers up there, and his content because, like Steve said, it's funny, it's silly, but it's heartwarming, it's good-hearted, and it's something that's a little bit positive that
Yeah.
the world is kind of lacking
And
nowadays.
your viewership funds something awesome.
Yeah.
That is the most important thing.
For sure. All right. So with that, this was another episode of Bridging the Gap on the Jersey First TV Network. I'm AJ Malillo.
I am Stephen Rambolo.
Have a great week, everybody.